Restoration Association. That's an important group. Remember that group. Enfield in Halifax was founded about 1754, in that neighborhood. Enfield is older. Enfield is the oldest town, oldest area actually in Halifax County. Some people have said you may see some writing if you start on the internet, look something about Enfield, it may say Huckleberry Swamp. At one point it was called that. Enfield got its name from a tract of land that was granted there in about 1730, and it was granted to John Lane, and it said the Enfield Tract. And that one tract of land there ties back into Governor Branch and the Bradfords. The 1730 is probably not old for Florida history because you had the Spaniard influence coming up, but for our area and lots of other areas of the state, 1730 is real early. So the man has a land grant there. There's been some question whether or not he actually built a house there. I think he did, and you may see the evidence today. But as time went on, about 1750, the Branch family and the Bradford family migrated south into the Halifax region. The Branches into Halifax, the Bradfords into the Enfield area. And the two people we're going to start off with, where I'm going to bring you from, are Colonel, and it's so near names I may get them confused. And look, if I mispronounce a word or a family name, please forgive me. In North Carolina, we say some things different. But anyway, I'll try to do the best I can. But Colonel John Bradford and Colonel John Branch. Now, both of them are colonels. And like I say, we're going to jump up and back and forward. So go with me. If you have a question, feel free to ask me. Bradfords came to Enfield, Branches in Halifax. Okay, so we get there about the Revolution. That's when they became colonels of local militia. But let's look at Enfield a little earlier than that, about 1758, 59. Well, one thing you need to know that North Carolina was granted to the 9 Lord Proprietors. Well, 8 of them says, well, King, you can have it back. The Lord Granville says, I want my land, and his land extended from the Virginia line down south of Enfield area. So if you got a grant, you had to pay basically a rent on the property. And Lord Granville sent his agents there in the colonies to collect his rent and send it back to England. Now we know from American history that we don't like taxes. Who in here likes taxes? Okay, we don't like taxes. Our ancestors didn't like taxes. We tolerate them, but we don't tend to tolerate unfair taxes. So about back up, I'm using this as a prompt. This is showing the Virginia line, Halifax County. This little wiggly line right here is the Roanoke River. You'll see right here Scotland Neck. See a little neck of the river. It's a little side note, the Scottish settlement there. It lasted 2 years, river flooded. They went down to Cross Creek, which is Fayetteville, North Carolina now. But the name is Scotland Neck. You have Halifax up here, Port Town, Enfield down here a little lower on 301. This wiggly line on the southern edge of the county is Fishing Creek, another notable body of water to remember. Gives you a little idea. And here, this purple line here is Interstate 95. This right here is Interstate 85, coming back down towards Greensboro. Okay, riots. Everybody likes a good riot, and I apologize, but I'm taking some sinus medicine. I've got to take a sip of water every once in a while. This sits on the side of the highway on 301 in Enfield. It says here in 1759, Lord Granville's land agents were compelled to give bond to return illegal fees. This was a forerunner of regulators. The regulators was a group of people who just didn't like the high taxes and unfair treatment. This is starting the quell of our revolutionary spirit. It started, many people point to Enfield, this action. Now they call it a riot. There were certain men involved, but everybody was upset about it. They weren't going to deal with Lord Granville's agent stealing from them anymore. On the coast, a little northeast of Halifax and Enfield, is the town of Edenton. If you ever come that way, go to Edenton. Looks like a Williamsburg, but it's on a bay. Everything is maintained and restored, but people live in the homes. It's really nice. The Francis Corbin, he's Lord Granville's agent, and he's the fellow that's been stealing. You know, the tax man wouldn't steal from you. Well, let's see what kind of house the tax man lived in. Oh my goodness. Up above the door right there, in that area right there is carved 1758. This is Corbin's house. One of the most recognizable houses in North Carolina, cupola house. This is facing the bay. He'd go up there and spy, here comes a ship. Let me go get my ledger, let me collect some taxes off this thing. These old country fellows in Enfield went all the way to Edenton. It takes us, today, an hour and a half to drive there. They went there and they drug Corbin out of the house. They carried him back to Enfield and threw him in the jail. Now we're going to back up a minute and say, well, what jail? There in Enfield, on the Enfield track, was an English courthouse. It was a brick courthouse, a jail, a tavern, silversmith, blacksmith, a little small village there. Today, if you come to Enfield, that's a cemetery. But they drug him back to Enfield. Now, a few years ago, someone came to the historic site with a key that their great-grandfather picked up in the field across the highway, right there where the courthouse sat at. I put my key down to show a little thing. That is supposedly, and it should be, the key to the courthouse that's at Enfield in 1750. The key to the colonial courthouse in Halifax, which is later, is actually in Raleigh Museum. It's only half that size. The key would have been made in England. Now I'm spinning gears and remember all the things. We had the branches, we had the Bradfords, we have Enfield, we have Halifax. So what's so special about Halifax in that area? Well, this depicts Wiley, and this is not Willie, this is Wiley Jones. Their family today will get up, no, it's not Willie, it's Wiley Jones. He lived in the Grove, there along Quonky Creek, coming into Halifax. There is a connection I won't go into with Thomas Jefferson. It's even thought that Jefferson designed the house. But Jones was anti-federalist. He didn't like a strong federal government. He voted against ratifying the Constitution for several years. When Washington came into Halifax, he says, I'll go out. And he was the man in Halifax. When George Washington, we'll learn a little bit later, came into Halifax, he said, I'll not come out of the house to greet him as a president. I'll greet him as a gentleman and a soldier. He was totally against a strong federal government. And I'm going to throw something at you here that the History Channel won't tell you. Local history says that one day Wiley Jones came down the street there in Halifax, and at the tavern there was a young man sitting out there beside the tavern, and he stopped and asked him what his condition was in life, and the young fellow impressed him. He carried him home. He lived with them for 2 years. They were very prominent people. His brother, General Allen Jones, lived across the Roanoke River. They adopted him. When the revolution breaks out, Wiley Jones carries this young man over to Edenton, introduced him to John Hughes, who was one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence from North Carolina. And he commissions him a ship. And this young man says, well, you all have done so much for me. No longer I'll be known as John Paul, I'll be known as John Paul Jones. There are slave descendants who come back today telling the same story. And it's interesting, to say the least. But I'm saying all these things to show you the historical context of where your families came out of. Okay, in that time period there, this is a little piece of money I have, and I don't intend on spending it, but £2 province of North Carolina, 1771. See, North Carolina was known as a province at that time. You have the Caswell and some other people, John Harvey, on the back, the big council. The reason I liked it so much on the back, I'm not going to show here, is signed by Joseph Montfort. Remember that name. Okay. During that same time, England would not allow any silver or gold come into the colonies because they wanted to keep that wealth back to themselves, and with wealth, there's power. That's what they perceived. Now, Spain, on the other hand, they're down in Mexico and Peru mining silver, and they're knocking out cobs and coins and trying to keep an accounting of everything. So that money filters back up into North Carolina. The Bradfords and branches, just like my ancestors, this is the kind of money they would have been using. And here's what's neat about it. All this came from Enfield. Now the bottom right there, I bought out of a state, out of a trunk. These two right here are cobs, see their irregular shape, and this coin right there is a Spanish 2 real. And as denoted down here, it was legal tender on it just for the war between the states. They didn't have much. You wanted less money than what I had in my pocket. I kind of make change, so well, cut the coin in force. Now on a piece of 8, the old cheer, 2 bits, 4 bits, 6 bits, $1. That's where it comes from. So they would cut the coins. Now if you pull a quarter out of your pocket today and look, you'll see a little reeded edge around it. People would take the silver back then and clip the edges and keep it, and pass coin on as face value. When we started minting coins, we said we don't want people defacing our coins and stealing, so we put the reed around there and you can look at the edge of it and see if somebody snipped it. Now our quarter's not worth 25 cents, so it doesn't really matter today, but it's sort of holdover from the past. This is a fine map, a copy of the map. This is in the historic site, painted on the wall there. South here came in and made maps of Newbern, Halifax, some other towns. This is the Roanoke River coming in. This is the main street coming through Halifax here. This is the site of the courthouse. We had the jail and the clerk's office are still there. They date from 1832. But this is the little village of Halifax. And this is
that river?
Excuse me?
Is that river Roanoke?
That's the Roanoke River. The Indian name was Maratuck, River of Death. Halifax was as far that you could reliably navigate that river inland. You could go a little further to Weldon if the river was up, but ships came from England, unloaded their wares here. If you would go there in Halifax, if you go back to 1770, 1776, or whenever, and the town commons, the green as it was called, right in here, and you sort of sit and listen, you'd hear every accent out of Europe. People of all sorts were coming there. Okay, so what happens in Halifax? And we're moving right along, we're on up here to 1776. Well, Halifax is an important enough town that the provincial Congress was meeting there. And they met and they resolved amongst themselves, and there was no signing like the Declaration. Everybody raised a hand or stood up or whatever. So some people say, well, he so-and-so signed the Halifax Sobs. No, they didn't. They stood up by acclamation. But in Halifax was the first formal sanction of American independence adopted in this town, April 12th, 1776. You look at the North Carolina flag today, you'll see that date up there. North Carolina, sometimes license plates have said first in freedom. North Carolina contends, and other states contend, but this was the first actual declaration by any colony happened here in Halifax to say we want independence. They instructed their delegates to the constitutional, I mean not the constitutional convention, but the convention that led to passing the Declaration of Independence. North Carolina told their fellows, vote independence. We want to be independent. Now, in 1950s, there were a series of murals done depicting North Carolina history. And this is depicting the passing of the Halifax Resolves. Now, I'll go ahead and throw the punchline out there pretty quick. One of the delegates is Colonel John Bradford of Enfield. Colonel Bradford, you can imagine, is depicted as one of those men coming out. The townspeople and the ladies are all outside. What's to vote? What's to vote? And they're all excited and happy. There were like 12 murals that were commissioned to tell the story of North Carolina history. I've sort of studied over them a little bit, and I'm talking about these are North Carolina history encapsulated. I can find a connection directly to 3 of them to the branch in Bradford's. So you have quite a heritage back in Halifax County and here as well. But now, as I said, North Carolina flag, April 12th, 1776, Halifax Resolves. This May the 20th, 1775 is a Mecklenburg Declaration.